Hello and welcome to another ATP video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pears. A walk through the front lines. But before we get to the front lines, a little bit of general news about what's happened overnight. There have been drone attacks continuing in certain areas of Ukraine, particularly down in the Mykolaiv, Kherson sort of area. Apparently, 17 out of 19 drones were taken out by the Ukrainians, which is a pretty good statistic if you are indeed Ukrainian. So that's good news for them there. There have been a few things to note. So here is Rybar and the SPN Telegram channels both say that there is still a problem with Spetsnaz units being employed poorly by senior infantry commanders who use them in infantry roles or give them unrealistic missions. It's the idea that the Spetsnaz are like your special forces troops that are being used in general infantry roles or for general missions, which is sort of not so much it's beneath them, but it's just a poor use of these guys, particularly well trained. But it just shows that there just isn't enough capability across the front lines for the Russians. So they're using these Spetsnaz troops in place of general infantry. Just shows a lacking there, doesn't it? Also, the things going on in Russia: enlistment officers being hit, photo bombed, other places going up. A second explosion in 4 days in Perm following the gunpowder factory blast, which killed 3 in the early hours today. The Fluorosil chemical plant in Zakamsk suffered a blast. 2 people were injured. Now, someone called me out yesterday and saying, you're pointing out all these fires in Russia. How do you know it's just what's your baseline stats? How do you know it's not some kind of anomaly that could be natural? It's like, okay, Russia does have a bad history of fires, but when you look at the fact that there's been so many firebomb instances, something like, I don't know, 54 over since February the 24th of sort of enlistment officers and things like that, when we've got actual recordings of people using Molotov cocktails. And then you see these big fires in these warehouses, and a lot of them are connected to the military. You start thinking, okay, I may not be 100% sure that this is sabotage, but it looks a lot like sabotage, and I think it's a fairly good sort of inductive, reasonable conclusion to say that it could well be sabotage. So although not all of the ones I report will be sabotage, there will be some naturals, Russian smoking and causing fire damage. But the number of really dubious fires leads one to believe that something else is going on. In fact, there's a Wikipedia page now for these fires that are taking place, and if you look down the list of the Wikipedia page, and I'll show you that in the extra video later, you can see that a lot of these places look fairly strategic in the way they've been chosen by potentially by saboteurs, or there's just a big coincidence. Kramatorsk has been hit overnight by missiles, as many as 6 targeted objects in the area. No details of damage yet. So Kramatorsk is, if you remember, the railway station of Kramatorsk was hit, and so here's Kramatorsk, just to try and get it into the center of the map. The time where a Russian cruise missile hit a railway station that was packed full of people trying to get out of Kramatorsk, and that was just a massive war crime. As far as I'm concerned, although the Russians obviously claimed they were trying to hit a military target somewhere nearby, but that was Kramatorsk, so that's been hit. What else to say? There is, so I'm gonna. This place is just to the east of Donetsk, so somewhere around here. In fact, I'll show you on my Google map. So here we've got Donetsk, and to the east of Donetsk is a place called Shakhtarsk. Uh, and Shakhtarsk has been hit by Ukrainian, some kind of Ukrainian, something. I'm not really 100% sure yet, but there's been a massive fire near the railway station. No reported casualties, but the fire is not yet under control. Well, this was from last night. It is, I think, under control now. Because here is the sort of end result of a lot of it, but it was an absolutely huge fire. Okay, so all of these, there's so many videos showing this massive fire, that if you just look down these videos, the fuel cars were going up, but as Tim White says there, it wasn't just fuel cars. It looks like there could have been freight nearby that could have had some value. So that was a huge bit of news from last night, that just shows the scope of what Ukraine can do if they're hitting right back here behind the front lines. Um, so that was Shakhtarsk. Anyway, let's get on to the front lines now. Just the only thing to say about drones is that it does seem that drones, although there were quite a few drones last night, there's a claim that they are running out of drones, the Russians, these Iranian drones, and that's why you've seen less of them, fewer drone attacks over the last week, although there's a number last night. And we've also been hearing that Syria factories been hit in Syria. A couple of Iranian generals who are connected with the drone manufacturing and distribution have been killed, possibly by Israelis. Um, uh, so there are things that people are working behind the scenes, so to speak, to try and inhibit the production and distribution of Iranian drones to the Ukrainians. So that could be, although that might be not affect stock right now, it could just be that the Russians have used up their stock, and that they are waiting for the rest of their order to be produced, but that could be under threat with the stuff going on behind uh, closed doors and in other countries. Let's hit the front lines. So we'll start up in the northeast. So if we take a little sort of look out, here's our map. Now the red represents obviously Russian lines and the blue Ukrainian lines, and where they overlap, it's a bit of information from possibly both sides, and so that represents sort of grey area. Ternova up comfortably in the sort of Kharkiv area here has the Russians have been attacking there, and it turns out that they've been repelled. But this is interesting. They keep trying to probe up along these northern borders. This is from Institute Study War, conducted an assault on Ternova, Kharkiv Oblast, likely to fix Ukrainian forces there and prevent them from reinforcing Ukrainian counter-offensive operations elsewhere. The General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled an attack, which is well removed from areas encompassed by the eastern Ukrainian counteroffensive. Russian forces likely do not intend to regain limited territory in border areas of Kharkiv Oblast, but instead likely hope to keep Ukrainian forces in the area that otherwise could join counteroffensive operations. Russian forces are likely hoping a similar outcome in northwestern Ukraine with their deployment of forces to the joint grouping of forces in Belarus and the messaging around it. So this is exactly what I said last week, in that the claim or the fact that around here, I haven't done the border particularly well here, but the Belarusian forces are amassing north of Ukraine, and the Russians going to support them is a case of drawing the Ukrainian defensive forces to around here and fixing them there so that they can't support elsewhere. And this looks like it could be the same over there. Okay, let's get on to the northern sort of. Let's look at the Kupiansk area. Not a lot of change around the Kupiansk area, around Vilshana, Persha Trevnevy. Some claims that Persha Trevnevy has been taken by the Ukrainians. I don't think that's true. So I'll just leave it as a sort of grey zone along those two settlements there. As we go to Kupiansk and down this highway towards Svatove, it's all about Svatove at the moment. So Svatove is that key place. Just to remind you, Svatove up in the northeast of the country, we have Kupiansk to Svatove to Kremena. Svatove is a hub, a logistics hub that connects the sort of northern Luhansk Oblast to towards the south to Kremena. That railway line is important, and the P66 highway and highway that then goes on to connect it to Kupiansk is important. Once that goes, the next point will be surely Starobilsk, which is another logistics hub. So it's all about Svatove at the moment, and the claim is that around Kuzermivka, it's all going on. So yesterday, the Russians claimed that yesterday there were 5 consecutive attacks that were repelled, one after the other, in and around Kuzermivka. So this is what again the Institute Study of War says, that several military bloggers claim that Russian forces repelled multiple attempted Ukrainian attacks towards Svatove, and that there were indeed 5 unsuccessful attacks from the Ukrainians. So I will just leave the lines broadly where they are. There are loads of claims going on around here about who's taken what. Rodka I've left as a somewhat of a grey area. Kovalivka as well. And there are some claims that the Ukrainians really are very close to Svatove, but it seems like there was a lot of pushback yesterday from the Russians. Now, it's really important to note that the weather has been bad for a couple of days. It looks like it's clearing up. This has been the case both up around here, well, pretty much all over the front lines. 2 days of bad weather, lots of rain, lots of mud. Rain means you can't get eyes in the sky up there. You can't get the drones to give you aerial indications of where enemy installments and troops are. So artillery has been somewhat quieter due to drone usage being cut. That looks to change. So it looks to be a few nice days this next week and over the coming 7 days, as there are some nice sunny days, and you might see that things will change along the front lines as both sides can then up their ante. Okay, as we come further down here, the Russians are making a whole bunch of claims about these settlements along the Kherson River. So this is the Kherson River, the P66 highway that it's elevated and overlooks these settlements along the Krasny River. So this is why this highway is super important, not just to cut logistics between Svatove and Kremna down here, but also it's a good position to start attacking these settlements that they would certainly want, and they would want to encircle Svatove. But the Russians have been hitting back, and there are claims now that certain pro-Russian sources like Rybar are claiming that Novodiane is under Russian hands, that even Makivka or certain parts of Makivka, which has been a place where the Ukrainians have been launching some of their counterattacks from. Well, if Makivka is partially under Russian control, then it's a bit of a problem. And then Nevsky, which yesterday there was video evidence of Ukrainian flags being flown in Nevsky. The Russians are saying they're putting that under threat, and so it's really difficult. I have that as a sort of, as you can see, multiple claims going on there. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, because the pro-Russian claims will tell you that the Russians do particularly well, and the Ukrainians haven't really said much. So we keep it like that. There apparently was repelled attacks towards Chervona Popivka again. By the Russians. They have repelled the Ukrainians there. So I've kept that sort of grey. And then down here, we are yet again in this big grey area between Terny, Yampovlivka, Zarichne, and Torsky over to Kremna. There are claims that the Russians are pushing back against these places too. But then there's a counterclaim that the Ukrainians now possibly have Dibrova back. Now, why this is important down here is this is all wooded area. The Ukrainians have shown themselves right from the beginning when you had that massive, 40-kilometer or 40-mile long convoy or column of static Russian vehicles. And the Ukrainians would use the forest really effectively, and they have all over the campaign. They've used the forest to sort of jump out, do special forces attacks, and then jump back in and use the forest to conceal themselves from aerial reconnaissance, and it's just very easy to hide. So this is a real problem for the Russians, because the Ukrainians can use the forest effectively in and around. And I don't know quite how far this line goes, whether the Ukrainians have the forest all the way back here or what. Obviously, it's going to be hard to get those kind of accurate details. However, this is why Bilorivka is super important, why the Ukrainians have been pushing forward, but then yesterday apparently counterattacks towards Bilorivka from the Russians, because they realized that this is a key possibly to the forest, and the forest is a key to sort of keeping this conurbation safe, and also if they want to advance any further to the west. So the forest is super important, which could be why Dibrova has been kind of victim to a counterattack, because it's quite easy for the Ukrainians to counter around there. But we shall see. Okay, as we come further south, remember the weather is bad. Things really haven't moved an awful lot. We go to Bakhmut. Now, the Russians claim, if you remember, Bakhmut, there was a counterattack by the Ukrainians, and in a couple of days, they took a whole bunch of, or they claim they took a whole bunch of land that the Russians had taken 2 months to take. And there were claims that the Ukrainians at the time had gone back to this crossroads. I've brought them back more towards this cement works. You've got the asphalt works down here, and you've got probably a load of grey area in the middle. Still lots of sort of talk about this area. But the Russians further down south, apparently, or at least the Russians claim, they are now countering back at Ivangrad and are contesting Ivangrad. I haven't heard so much from the Ukrainians, so I will put that, this kind of represents the Russians making the claim, the Ukrainians, not necessarily conceding that territory yet. But the Russians do appear to be trying to do this larger encirclement, both from down south and from up north. Again, lots of attack on Solidar, but not really any movement there. And God, look, there's yet another Bilorivka, yet another Berestovi. Just Ukrainians do. Seems like they've only got about 20 names, and they just keep repeating them. No, sorry, Ukraine, I'm being harsh. But there are so many repeated names, and in fact, so what's really interesting here? So Epitny. So the claim is that the Russians are countering around Ivangrad, and they are putting pressure again on Epitny, which is the key to the south of Bakhmut. And if we continue going down south to of Avdivka, which is in the same situation as Bakhmut, this place that is just to the sort of northwest of Donetsk, and there's been like this for so long, just like Bakhmut. There is this attempt to encircle Avdivka with Kamyanka at the top. There's renewed attacks against Kamyanka, and you've got this place, Epitny, down south, which is the key, arguably, to Avdivka. Now, Epitny is under more pressure. Again, the Russians are pushing on Epitny from Spartak, but also this settlement to the west called Vodyany. Apparently, the Russians are basically in there and have control over some of the settlement in Vodyany. So there is this move, this looking like a successful move of the Russians to push north and to continue this large encirclement of Avdivka. And that could pose some trouble for the Ukrainians because they have held out so successfully here. Now, this is from Pisky, which took so long for the Russians to take on the northwest or outskirts of Donetsk, the city of Donetsk. Pervomaisky, apparently they're struggling a little bit in Pervomaisky. Maybe the Ukrainians have taken back a few meters in Pervomaisky. So although they've taken more in Vodyany, they're struggling a bit here. But then this is literally meters a day, either way, one way or the other. So anyway, that's probably one of the only bits of really, I wouldn't say definitely confirmed because it's coming from the Russian side, but one area where there has been meaningful movement that I would probably admit has happened up in the Kremer to Kupiansk line. It's just there's all sorts of claims going on over there. Still the usual sort of not a lot. I've got again unconfirmed sort of move. This was from several days ago to Stepney. I just heard nothing since then in that area. It's fairly quiet along here to the Zaporizhzhia front line, and there are claims that again reinforcements are piling up in Zaporizhzhia, under the understanding that there will be some kind of counterattack that comes from Zaporizhzhia. When that will be, who knows? I mean, we're starting to get into really sort of rainy, muddy, and then frozen season, and neither of those conditions are great for counterattacks. Although you can move mechanized equipment quite well over frozen ground, it's just the biting cold at night that is, has been such a problem for historically. I mean, if you go back to Napoleonic times, it's never a good time to start trying to do offensives. Okay, so we move into Kherson, and in Kherson we have a few claims. So what we had, there is another K-52 attack helicopter and a Su-25 fighter, all within 40 minutes in the Kherson area. There have been Russian claims that they downed a Ukrainian MiG-29 jet in this area here. So it's happening on both sides. However, the helicopter losses for the Russians around here are just huge. And apparently, this could well be because they're running low on munitions. And when they're running low on sort of artillery ammunition, they have to do that support of their troops with close air support. And the close air support is just getting hammered. So that looks like, four Ka-52 helicopters in just a couple of days and the jet. It's not looking good here. Now, I have to say, I've not really moved anything around here. It looks like there's just a big old grey area still. That it is difficult to move around here because there has been bad weather. Rain makes mud. This is all agricultural area, and it being agricultural area, there are loads of ditches and irrigation channels. Those channels are being used by the Russians to help defend these areas as kind of earthen defenses instead of having to dig them themselves. They're ready made. So there are so many of these ditches around, and it's the same actually up on the around the sort of Bakhmut, the Donetsk, Luhansk lines as well, and in fact up to Kupiansk, Kremenna. There's so much of this area is agricultural, and when it's agricultural, you get irrigation ditches and stuff that means it's quite difficult to overcome. So there have been these probing attacks, but the Russians are quite well dug in. I think there are reports of losses, heavy losses on both sides, to equipment. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few days as this brightens up and the drones are able to come into play again. We shall see. Now, I've talked about how the Russians are claiming that or there are claims around that the Russians are fortifying Kherson city, so they're not going to withdraw completely across the Dnipro, that they are certainly going to hold on to that. There are also claims that they are fortifying Novokakhovka over here, because obviously this is where the dam is, and this is they need to hold this to get fresh water to Crimea, as I've talked about lots before. You've also got these sort of pictures coming out along the Dnipro River, that they are looking to dig themselves in. There's a trench there. If you can't see it, it's quite a dark picture, and another trench there. So they are building fortifications across the river. The Institute for the Study of War says the Ukrainian Resistance Center reported that Russian forces in Novokakhovka are preparing defenses in the city for street fighting. Russian sources reported that Russian forces are building fortifications in Kherson city and creating strongholds in case of future Ukrainian breakthroughs, and one source calling the fortifications the Surovikin line. Novokakhovka notably lies on the east bank of the Dnipro River, making Russian preparations for fighting in the city contrast with Russian claims that Russian forces intend to hold Kherson city and the west bank of the Dnipro. This may also indicate that Russian forces anticipate battles to take place on the east bank of the Dnipro River in Russian-occupied territory, deeper in Kherson Oblast. Geolocated footage from October the 26th shows a resident complaining about Russian forces withdrawing to the east bank of the Koshevaya River, 5 kilometers southwest of Kherson city. These continued reports of Russian withdrawals from the area suggest that the Russian military does not expect to hold Kherson city, even if it intends to fight for it. So it's also worth noting in here, hopefully I can find it. Around here, you've got another river called the Kosheva River, and there's a bridge over that. It could well be this bridge here, or another one that has a Ukrainian flag flying on it, or that was photographed yesterday, which is interesting because this is going very close to Kherson, and how that got there could just be obviously uh, saboteurs and or collaborators for the Ukrainians and with the Ukrainians. But interesting stuff. So it's lots to look out for in and around Kherson, but still waiting for this big offensive to actually happen. It could just be waiting for the right weather. Anyway, there you go. Not too much, but things to talk about. Check out my Ukraine War Update extra video that will come out a little bit later, talking about other things to do with this. And please check out the interview I did with Tim White and the Ukraine expert the other day. Link will be in the description. Anyway, thank you so much for supporting the channel. Please like, subscribe, share, and if you can help the channel, please buy me a coffee or PayPal, or even check out uasupporter.com/ATP. And if you buy any of these goods, such as maybe even a pillow, then my channel gets a tiny bit of commission. So if you want to show your support for Ukraine, you can do that. If you are pro-Russian, don't have a pillow like that or something. Anyway, thanks. Toodle pips. See you later.